So, great fight. Liam Williams versus Liam Smith. The Battle of the Liams. Great fight. Really looking forward to this one. This is the classic domestic 50-50 matchup. The winner probably goes on to fight or to even be a world champion. I know this fight is for the WBO interim belt that we expect Canelo to vacate, seeing as he's got no future at light middleweight. The loser probably drops down to domestic level for the at least the next few fights. Liam Smith comes to the ring, 24 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw. He's been stopped once by Canelo Alvarez. Of his 24 wins, 13 of them come by way of knockout. He's up against Liam Williams, 16 wins, 0 losses, 1 draw. Of his 16 wins, 11 come by way of knockout. So two guys with respectable knockout percentages in the light middleweight division. Now, Liam Smith is the bigger name. Liam Smith is a guy who, obviously he's part of that famous Smith family. And I guess you could say he's a guy who is more established at an elite level. He certainly fought on by far the biggest stage when he fought at the AT&T Stadium in Texas against Saul Canelo Alvarez. But he came up short. Smith, as we know, won a vacant world title, WBO versus the light middleweight title against John Thompson in 2015. He then had, if I'm honest, 2 very poor defences against Jimmy Kelly and against Predrag Radosevich before losing to Canelo. Since then, he's returned in a 4-rounder against the journeyman. Liam Williams, he's been fighting at more, I guess you could say, domestic level. He won, well, I think he defended his British title against Gary Corcoran in a fight that lives long in the memory as being a pretty good fight. And other than that, there's several sort of, borderline domestic names on his resume. Smith, for me, has got a stronger resume and has definitely been competing at a higher level. But if you look at Liam Smith's record, it's actually fairly weak in terms of the names he's beaten, I've got to say. Who is the best name that Liam Smith has actually been in with? Well, sorry, that's a very poorly phrased question, because the best name he's been in with is Canelo, but who is the best name he's beaten? Is it John Thompson? Is it Jason Wellborn? Is it Predrag Radosevich? Realistically, I'd pick Liam Williams to beat all of those guys. So what I'm getting at is Liam Smith does have an edge in experience, an edge in top-level competition, an edge in resume, but it's actually more slight than you'd initially think. Smith's got the benefit of that experience and the benefit of age, but maybe he hasn't actually proven himself at quite as an elite level as you would think, given his record as a world champion who defended his belt, who won the belt and then defended it twice. Anyway, the fight itself is a very interesting fight, and it's been billed as a fight that does have the potential to be fight of the year. And I can see why. We should have a good clash of styles here. Liam Williams is a boxer, puncher who likes to scrap. Liam Smith is a come-forward guy, a stalker, a poacher, a presser fighter. And you do think at some point these guys are probably going to exchange heavy leather. Both of them have shown a liking for a scrap. If I look at fights that really sum up both of these guys, in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. For Liam Smith, I think of John Thompson, and for Liam Williams, I think of Gary Corcoran. Liam Smith, John Thompson. Thompson started the fight well. He picked up several of the early rounds by boxing Liam Smith long. Thompson showed in that fight that if you were a guy with legs, with a jab, with distance, you could definitely outbox Liam Smith. Liam Smith was, for me, coming second best to a guy who could move, to a guy who could box from range and use distance. Now, admittedly, Thompson was a guy who we suspected would fade in the fight, and that did seem to be Gallagher and Smith's plan, was, they didn't seem to be overly phased about losing the early rounds and then looking to walk down Thompson and pile on the pressure and stop him late on in the fight. And they actually did, and they actually stopped him in the mid-rounds, if I remember correctly, so they got to him pretty early. But for me, that was more about Thompson's frailties. it showed the best of Liam Smith. When he decided to put the pedal to the metal, he was able to close the gap on Thompson. He was able to grind him down. He was able to hit him and stalk him and, get him to the body and catch him with uppercuts and hooks and, really, really hurt him. However, it showed some vulnerabilities. It showed some vulnerabilities in terms of his propensity to be potentially outboxed. Liam Williams against Gary Corcoran. Liam Williams for me, a level above Gary Corcoran. A guy who had real substantial advantages, certainly in terms of boxing pedigree, certainly in terms of power. He was a guy who I rated far in excess of Gary Corcoran. But Liam Williams' own frailties came to light in that fight, and it ended up being perhaps more of a barn burner than it should have been. You'd kind of like to see Liam Williams go for a guy like Gary Corcoran quite comfortably, but he made it quite hard work. It developed into a bit of a scrap. We saw Williams himself taking punishment and looking vulnerable at times in the fight. Williams' edge in power and Williams' edge in technique saw him come home, and he actually won the fight by very late stoppage, definitely getting the better of Gary Corcoran. But what I'm getting at is, in both of those guys' biggest wins, Smith against John Thompson and Liam Williams against Gary Corcoran, we saw the best of them, but we also saw some vulnerabilities in either fighter. And I think those vulnerabilities are actually the key to this fight, because we talk about Liam Smith getting outboxed in the early rounds by John Thompson. I think Liam Williams will have looked at that, and I think he'll have looked at other Liam Smith fights, and I think his trainer, who I believe is Gary Lockett, will have come up with what is for me a relatively obvious game plan of trying to box long. For me, Liam Smith is half the fighter he is on the outside as he would be if he was able to dictate matters inside the pocket. And I think if Liam Williams can get clean, crisp punches going from the outside, if he can, use his movement, use his boxing, then I really do make him a substantial favourite in this fight. Having said that, if we look at the Liam Williams-Gary Corcoran fight, I believe the Liam Williams who fought Gary Corcoran on that night would actually lose to Liam Smith, because he allowed too many openings and he allowed the fight to be dictated more by his temperament and getting sucked into a scrap, as opposed to allowing his boxing to do the work. And I think if he does that against Liam Smith is a very hard, tough guy, and he's a guy who really comes into his own when he's able to work in that engine room and to pile on pressure inside the pocket. And I think if he does that against Liam Smith, he'll get beaten, because I think Liam Smith is actually a very dangerous fighter on the inside, and when he's allowed to put the pressure on. Even in that Canelo fight, and I know Canelo handled Liam Smith with a bit in hand, but even in that Canelo fight, you still see pockets of success and relevant success from Liam Smith. And Canelo's a guy who is obviously operating at the very, very, very top level in the sport. So this is an interesting fight for me. You're going to have Liam Williams, one would presume, trying to avoid a scrap. You're going to have Liam Williams trying to use his boxing, trying to use his fundamentals, trying to use distance. You're going to have Liam Smith looking to suck Liam Williams into a brawl, looking to unload body punches on him, looking to close the gap. And I think the fight could develop into the classic boxer versus presser fighter. I actually think there's a relative likelihood that at some point Liam Smith will be able to drag Liam Williams into a war here. I think Liam Smith has been quite dismissive of Liam Williams in the build-up, and I expect that to continue as we go to the final press conference and to the weigh-in. And I think Liam Williams will feel that, because he's a guy who's let emotions get to him in the past, and you can see he's a guy who, on occasion, has got riled up during fights, especially in that Gary Corcoran fight. I also believe Liam Williams is a guy who genuinely believes in his own power and thinks he's a very big puncher, which, to be fair to him, some of his performances suggest that he is. And I think that if Liam Smith does look to close the reins, there will be times when Liam Williams is inclined to actually exchange lever and to have to try and get some of his own work off, because he believes in his own power and believes in his own abilities. And I think that if he at all derogates from the boxing game plan, then it really, really does become a fight that goes in Liam Smith's favour. So it's a very, very tough fight to call. But all in all, having weighed up all my options, in what is a very close pick, I'm going to side with Liam Williams. And I think the reason for that is because I believe with this being a big fight for Liam Williams, he's going to know that there's no room to mess up here. The Gary Corcoran fight, he was able to give up 10% of his advantages and still have enough to win that fight. And the reason for that was fundamentally he was a better fighter with a higher upside than Gary Corcoran. Against Liam Smith, I think the margin for error is much, much slighter. I believe he knows that. I believe Gary Lockett knows that. And as a result, I think the game plan will have been drummed into him. And I think he will, not be taking as many risks and potentially putting in a more disciplined performance. I expect Liam Williams to win the early rounds behind a jab and, boxing and trying to work off the jab. I think Liam Smith will probably do what I consider now to be a classic Joe Gallagher fighter performance of not worrying necessarily about losing the first 2 or 3 rounds, putting his hands up and walking forward, make Liam Williams work for 3 minutes of every round, maybe be 4-0 down after 4, but have a man who's expended a lot of energy and then start to build a pressure after that point. My concern is that, like Jorge Linares did against Anthony Crolla, Liam Williams is actually a relatively sophisticated boxer, admittedly to a lesser extent, and I believe that Liam Williams, with his combinations and with his shot selection, will actually be able to find some gaps in the Liam Smith defence. And I think that as Liam Williams begins to pick up the rounds and have confidence, he could put together a pretty strong lead in the first half of the fight. I believe Liam Smith will come into the fight late on. I think Beefy is an absolute warrior. He's got a never say die attitude. I think he's got a chin as well. I don't necessarily think that Williams is going to be able to completely keep him off him, despite the fact Williams does definitely carry power. And I suspect towards the later end of the fight, Smith may well have success. But I think Williams may have established a strong lead, and I think Williams' youth, Williams' momentum, and Williams' will to win will stop him from, getting ground down in those late rounds. And I think whilst there may be 1 or 2 difficult moments late on in the fight, I'm going to say that I think Liam Williams will have done enough in the early to middle rounds, building up a lead behind his boxing, to win the fight on points in what could be a close decision. Liam Smith is a guy I really, really like as a boxer, but I just don't believe he's really elite level from the outside. And I don't think he's necessarily going to be able to walk down a guy like Liam Williams as easily as he did with John Thompson, for example, or Jimmy Kelly. I just believe that Liam Williams has a little bit more pop, a little bit more technique, a little bit more class. So I'm going Liam Williams here in what could be a very good fight and in what could be a very competitive fight. Let me know your thoughts, people. Do you like this fight? Who's going to win it? What do you make of my prediction? If you've enjoyed the video, please click the thumbs up. That supports the channel. If you're new and you haven't done so before, do take the time to subscribe so you can check out all of my other stuff. As always, much appreciated, and many thanks for you guys tuning in.